Thank you, Deputy Jones. In Dr. Murray's case, the defendant, Dr. Murray, is present with his counsel as before. The people by their counsel as before. Dr. Shafer is present on the stand as before, and all jurors and alternates are present. Could everybody, good afternoon to the jurors. Good afternoon again. Thanks. Dr. Shafer, good afternoon again, sir.
Good afternoon,
You acknowledge you are still under oath and still sworn to tell the truth?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. This is a resumption of cross-examination by the defense. Mr. Chernoff, thank you.
Dr. Shafer, good afternoon again.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chernoff.
We're back to People's 212, and you were kind enough to show us what else you had contributed to this insert, right?
Correct.
And this is also what else you contributed. This is data from your manuscript as well?
Yes, this is all covered in the manuscript which I hold here. This is the revision dated October 21st, 1992. That's also described in a letter that I sent to Dr. White in 1992.
Let me show you this graph that's on. By the way, this is a 26-page document, pretty lengthy insert. This is the computer modeling that you did based on data that was provided, right?
Correct, and I have earlier examples here.
You had testified that this data was provided by AstraZeneca?
No, this data actually comes from the study by Julie Barr that was done at by Dr. Juliana Barr. It was done at Stanford University. That's where the model came from that was used to create this graph. That is in evidence.
Juliana Barr also does modeling, doesn't she?
Yes, Dr. Barr did a fellowship with me.
Are you saying that the data that is represented by this graph was compiled by Juliana Barr?
Yes, it was collected at the Palo Alto Administration's Medical Center.
Do you know who did the experiments, I take that back, did the studies that resulted in that data?
I was the principal investigator.
And was any of Dr. White's data used?
Not for this graph.
I see. This is 1991 when you did this insert, right?
As I've said before, this graph was from 1996.
I got you.
The MAC sedation work was 1991.
At the time that you prepared this insert, you were an assistant professor at Stanford?
That is correct.
And Dr. White had, by that time, left Stanford to take another position.
I think that's correct. I'd have to check his CV, but I believe that's correct.
In 1988, when the paper was done, Audrey Shafer and you did your paper with Dr. White.
Correct.
You were a fellow.
Of Don Stansky's, that is correct.
Can you explain what a fellow is?
A fellow is a person who has come to a institution to learn either a focused clinical skill, such as perhaps neuroanesthesia, cardiac anesthesia, or obstetrical anesthesia, or has come to learn a scientific discipline, which in my case was this thing called clinical pharmacology, which is all the modeling that I've explained to you. Some fellowships include both. There will be a scientific component and a clinical component. My fellowship was a scientific fellowship with Dr. Stansky.
Which was involving pharmacokinetic.
Clinical pharmacology in anesthesia.
And any modeling involved in that?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. All right. You would agree with me that the data that was provided for this graph, or any of the graphs that you did, is vitally important.
Absolutely.
If the data is not correct, the graph cannot be correct. The modeling can't be correct.
Yes, fundamentally everything tracks back to data.
It's really garbage in, garbage out is the philosophy.
Data is paramount in science.
If the data is not correct, your modeling is not going to be correct. Is that fair to say?
I'll accept that.
All right. Now, you provided to the prosecution 3 Propofol papers that you have prepared, or papers involving Propofol, pharmacokinetics of Propofol, and I believe that was discussed during your direct testimony.
Yes.
But you've done more papers involving Propofol, right?
I've done a lot of papers involving propofol.
All right. Let's go over a few of your other publications.
Yes.
Okay?
May I pull up my CV just to accompany you? I have it here. Go ahead.
And I've got numbers for you so we can do this quick.
Okay.
All right? Let's go to page 9 of your CV. That's number 29.
Yes.
And this involves the pharmacokinetics of propofol in children.
Yes.
You were principal of this.
No, Dr. Kataria, who at the time was at the University of Washington, was the principal investigator, gathered these data, and at the request of AstraZeneca, which is, I'm slowing down, I'm sorry. These data were gathered, I believe, at the University of Washington.
Let me
But-
object to non-responsive. Were you principal of this study, or were
The
you?
objection sustained. The last answer stricken, disregarded. I believe it would call for a yes or no. Were you the principal investigator?
Dr. Kataria was the principal investigator. I was not the principal investigator.
Was your involvement in this paper,
I did all of the analysis.
the modeling?
Yes.
Let's turn to page 11, number 15 of your CV. This paper
Number
involved,
15?
I believe it's page 11, number 57.
Number 57, thank you, yes.
Have I got that right?
Mm-hmm.
This is a paper that involves propofol and two other drugs, is that right?
That is correct.
And you were principal on this?
These data were all gathered by Don Stansky, with the exception of the propofol data, where I was the principal investigator. There are three separate drugs. I was the principal investigator for the propofol study, and Don Stansky was the principal investigator for the alpha-fentanyl and midazolam data collection.
As part of this study, were you required to obtain, or actually perform studies on human beings to obtain data? Were you asked to do human studies in this particular paper?
I don't. Investigators do studies not because they're asked to, but because they want to. I don't understand the nature of the question.
Okay, did you? Did you do human studies in
Yes.
this paper?
Yes.
Okay. And the data that was accumulated was based on human studies? These
Yes.
human studies you did? All right. Let's go to page 10, number 54 of your CV. This is titled Inhalation versus Intravenous Anesthesia.
Yes.
Can you tell us what this paper was about?
This is a paper that was a fictitious debate that was conducted in Cadiz, Spain, in which I played the roles of both Dr. Paul White and Dr. Ted Eager. I attended a meeting where there was to be a debate. But in setting up the meeting, the person I was debating, Dr. Michael Roizen, had prepared the same side of the debate that I had prepared and had to leave before the debate. So I agreed to debate myself. And I gave both sides of this debate. Page 54 here, this paper is from notes.
Dr. Shafer, let me ask you a question. You chose the conversation between Dr. Edgar and Dr. White, is that right?
That was all portrayed by me,
Oh,
yes.
yeah. And how did you do? Pretty good job?
I believe, I'd have to look at it, I think Dr. Eager won the debate with the audience in Cadiz, Spain.
All right. Now, why did you choose Dr. Eager and Dr. White?
Dr. Eager was chosen as the person who is most associated with the use of inhaled, the debate. The debate was, are you better off if you get an inhaled anesthetic, one that you breathe, or are you better off with an intravenous anesthetic, specifically propofol? It's a subject that anesthesiologists like to debate.
So back to my original question, why did you choose Dr. Eager and Dr. White?
Because Dr. Eager is prominently associated with inhaled anesthetics, and Dr. White is prominently associated with the clinical use of propofol infusions.
Now, let's go to page 19 of your CV, going down. There are two chapters of books that you wrote or co-wrote.
I believe you mean to say book chapters, I'm just guessing.
Chapters? Yes, chapters. Yes. And I'm going to refer you to Chapter 2, Basic. There's Young's, and both you and Professor Young's wrote these chapters, right?
I don't know what chapter you're talking about.
All right. Well, you didn't number it, so let's go down. I'm going to number it for you. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 9 on the list. It's page 19.
On mine, that'd be McCluskey and Shafer.
I'm going to go ahead and
That's fine,
Block
just
it.
show me here, yes.
okay.
Yes, yes.
This is 2 chapters you wrote for this book, Basic Pharmacokinetic and Pharmacodynamic Principles. Is that right?
That is correct.
And this is a book where the editor was Paul White,
That's correct.
and the book is titled what?
The book is entitled, I believe it's called Intravenous, yes, Intravenous Anesthesia.
All right. And the book is titled here.
Ambulatory Anesthesia in Medicine.
All right. These particular books, you wrote these chapters at the request of Dr. White? Is
Yes.
that right?
Yes.
Do you consider these books to be authoritative texts?
No. These books are intended as instruction to practicing clinicians. I think they're high-quality texts, but authoritative to me really refers to the medical literature. And these books are not scientific studies, but they're high-quality books. I don't mean to say anything. The question is, what do you mean by authoritative? I need an explanation of that term.
Well, would you at least agree that your chapters are authoritative?
Like the book, I think they're good chapters. I consider authoritative to be original scientific research.
Are these books still used today?
I use it. Yes.
And in these books, actually, Dr. White is the one who wrote the chapter on propofol.
That's correct. Yes.
You have known Dr. White for 20 years then up here, since 1988. So
I would say 30 years. I believe Audrey started, my first wife Audrey started working with Paul in 1982, 1983, something like that.
And you-
Nearly 30 years.
And you, in fact, you wrote in 2009, prior to your involvement in this case, you nominated Dr. White for Excellence in Research Award.
Yes, yes, I have that here.
And one of the reasons you did that was that you said pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics of propofol infusions during general anesthesia, this is the 1988,
Yes.
for many years was the definitive manuscript on propofol pharmacokinetics.
That's correct.
So, 2 days ago, when you were asked about Dr. White's statement or alleged statement about oral propofol, drinking propofol, you said, I was disappointed.
That's correct.
It's a very dismissive statement, isn't it?
I was very disappointed.
Still.
Still disappointed.
You said that in court, obviously, right? You said
Yes.
that, knowing the TVs are here, right? You know that this is internationally.
Testifying, it's
I
irrelevant.
think it's argumentative. I think
Let me ask you.
Just a moment, please.
Yeah, okay.
Sustain.
I'll withdraw.
All right, it's withdrawn.
You also said that a first-year medical student would know about first pass, right?
That is correct.
And you said, when Mr. Walgren asked you if there were any studies on human consumption, oral consumption of propofol, you said no, right, at the time. You said that there were none at the time that
Correct.
all right. And when asked why, you said because it's so obvious.
Yes.
Well, let's talk about some of the things you also know about this, all right?
Okay.
You know that you read Dr. White's letter to Mr. Flanagan, did you not?
Yes, I did.
You know that it was a letter to Mr. Flanagan, right?
To the people. I don't.
I'm sustaining the objection to the characterization.
Well, did you see that Dr. White had written a letter talking about this case, this particular case?
Objection is to the characterization. This was discovery provided to the people.
It's either a letter or it's not.
Just a moment, please. The objection is overruled. Counsel can pursue it if you wish.
May I pull the letter up for my own reference?
Sure.
Thank you.
If you need the question re-asked, you let us know.
I have the letter here, which I will say follows the same format of my letter to Mr. Walgren. I thought that was customary.
Then you know that what Dr. White says in his letter, that it is speculated that Mr. Jackson added a portion of the lidocaine to one of his drink bottles.
Let me read you, may I read you exactly what it says?
Well, why don't you see if that is a correct statement?
Is that
You can answer
correct or
yes or
not?
no.
Okay, give me the statement again.
It is speculated that Mr. Jackson added a portion of the lidocaine propofol mixture to one of the fruit drink bottles found at bedside. You recall that?
Let me find it. That's one of several statements. That follows the statements.
A non-responsive, he is.
The objection sustained, the answer stricken, please disregard.
That statement occurs.
Just wait a minute, please. Is that a statement in the, one statement in the letter?
I'm trying to find that exact statement. That is at the end of a long sentence, and it's actually in it's a whole paragraph. In the end of that sentence, it says, "It is speculated
That's
that
Dr.
Mr. Jackson."
Objection and
Just a moment, please.
non-responsive.
The objection sustained, the answer stricken. You can just answer yes or no to the question.
Yes.
Thank you.
Your Honor,
You know the...
what's being cited is not a complete sentence, so he asked him, I think he's just trying to clarify the
I'm
answer.
pretty sure that read direct is for those kind of...
The objection, it remains overruled. Ask your next question, please.
You know the circumstances of that letter, don't you? Do you?
I assume.
Well, do you know?
Just a moment, please.
No.
Counsel, for both of you, if an objection is interposed, I need a rule on it before you go to the next question. So please, just be courteous. The objection is sustained. Let's just have the question. Re-asked.
Do you know the circumstances of that letter?
No.
Do you know, were you told that that Dr. White had to prepare that letter in 2 days because Mr. Flanagan was being cited for contempt for discovery? Did you know that?
Your Honor, this is
Did you know that?
Just a moment, please.
All right.
Just wait a minute.
So,
You know, it seems like nobody pays any attention, which is okay, except in here, where it's not okay. Please, the objection is sustained. That last answer is stricken, and the question has no meaning without the answer. Mr. Chernow, thank you.
you know that the question was posed because there was an amount of propofol in Michael Jackson's stomach. Right?
objection calls for speculation.
I know I don't know that.
The objection is overruled. The answer remains.
You haven't reviewed the autopsy report in this case?
Objection.
You've asked me about the
Wait,
circumstances of the
wait,
letter.
member, please.
Have you reviewed
Wait a
the
minute. May I see counsel for a moment, please?
Did you read the autopsy report? Did you read the toxicology in the autopsy
Yes, I did.
report? Are you familiar with propofol was found in Michael Jackson's stomach?
Yes, I am.
Do you remember the number?
I have it here. And let me give it to you precisely. It's easier for me to work in the concentration domain, and the concentration of propofol was 1.86 micrograms per mil.
It was actually reported in the autopsy as 0.13 milligrams, though, wasn't it?
If that's what the math works out to, then yes.
So you, after in responding to that, sent a study to Mr. Walgren involving piglets, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And that study involved sticking suppositories into piglets, the rectum of piglets.
I don't believe they were suppositories.
Oh, capsules
I believe it was just straight propofol liquid.
into the anus
Yes.
of piglets.
Yes.
And you informed Mr. Walgren there was no human oral studies.
That's correct.
So you called Ian Glenn, is that who you said you called? Did you call, is that Ian Glenn? Am I wrong about that?
I didn't call him. I contacted Dr. Glenn by email this summer on the recommendation of Dr. White.
And you know that Dr. White also contacted Ian Glenn.
Dr. White's the one who suggested I contact him.
Ian Glenn is you called the father of propofol. He's a chemist. He developed propofol.
He's a chemist. He developed propofol, yes.
He's not an anesthesiologist. He's a chemist.
That's correct.
And in response to this, you then performed, I believe your testimony was, you commissioned or you worked with Pablo Sepulveda in doing an oral consumption test with humans in propofol, right?
Correct.
Prosecutor didn't ask you to do that, did he?
No.
Nobody asked you to do that,
No.
right?
Is that correct?
That's correct, yes, that's correct.
And you know that Dr. White, in addressing the same issue, you know that he commissioned a study paid for by the defense involving oral propofol in beagles.
I did not know that.
Well, do you know that now?
I know you just told me.
Is that the first time anyone ever told you?
I heard Paul about maybe a month ago commented in a phone call that you had performed such a study and you had ruled it out. And I think, and so that was the first I heard about it. I was at the airport, at Burbank Airport, and Paul told me in a phone call that you had performed some study. I didn't know it was in beagles. I just knew you had done an animal study.
And beagles are larger mammals than rats and piglets, right?
Hopefully.
Okay. You recall Paul White saying, I ruled it out. Is that what you said?
No, Paul told me that you had done a study and you had decided that propofol had no oral bioavailability, something along those lines.
So,
or you had already.
But, now, so you know that Paul White did the study as a result of that. Now you.
I do not know that.
Oh,
No,
oh.
this is the first I've heard that Paul did the study.
I see. You, on the other hand, did a human study.
Yes?
Yes, yes.
You commissioned or worked with Pablo Sepulveda in Chile, right?
Yes,
To do a human study.
yes,
And the issue was the oral bioavailability of propofol.
yes,
And you used human beings, gave them propofol, right?
yes.
You had a protocol involved there,
Yes.
right? Who paid for this study?
I told him that I'd be happy to pay for the assay. The volunteers were not paid. The assay will come to a total of about $600 for all the propofol samples. I told him I was happy to pay for that.
How long did the study take?
Maybe the volunteer portion was about a month and the assay was about another month.
You took 2 months completing the study, right?
Maybe a month for IRB approval, 6 weeks, something like that, yes.
And then you wrote a paper,
Yes,
and you didn't stop there. You submitted this paper at an international conference.
yes.
You submitted it for peer review.
Well, the only peer review it's had to date is first by the judges of the ISAT meeting who determined what paper should be accepted. But I also sent it to Dr. White for comment. I sent it to Dr. Dennis Fisher, and I sent it to Dr. Glenn, all of whom offered their comments that were incorporated into the manuscript.
So in response to the question about oral bioavailability of propofol, you did a 2-month study, wrote a paper, and presented it to an international conference.
Correct.
Despite the fact that even a first-year medical student would know that that's just simply ridiculous, right?
Correct.
So I suppose after peer review, that's what your peers would tell you. What a waste of time. Is that what you expect to hear?
I think, and the important thing to say, as you said earlier, data are king in science. In science, data is the most important thing. Rather than sit and debate on first principles, it's better to have human data because that is not ambiguous.
So what you did in court, well, actually what you did to analyze the problem was far in excess of what Dr. White did. You investigated far more than Dr. White did.
Correct. I had human data so that there was no question about the answer.
And then you came into court and said, I'm disappointed in Dr. White, right?
Correct.
You preferred to shove it down his professional throat, is what you
It's a tad of
did.
an argumentative question. Mr. Chernoff?
Dr. Shafer, you
Just a
didn't...
moment, please.
Okay. I'll withdraw the question.
Another question, please.
Dr. Shafer, you didn't even stop there, did you? You didn't even stop there, did you? You literally swallowed propofol.
Before the study, yes.
You literally took 20 milliliters and swallowed it.
That's correct.
Did you get informed consent before you did that?
I knew it was inert.
And so before you even testified, you knew that Dr. White was not going to say that Michael Jackson swallowed propofol. You knew that before you ever testified.
How could he know
I'll
that?
overrule the objection. It goes to the witness's state of mind and credibility. You may answer it.
I did not know what Dr. White would say, and I still don't know what Dr. White will say.
Let me show you. I want to talk about some of your simulations. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Is easy?
Triple A.
Triple A. Got it. This is your simulation.
Correct.
It's marked as Defense AAA. And we saw this in your testimony yesterday, right?
Correct.
Now, my correct me if I'm wrong, you've only done one simulation with regard to lorazepam. Is that right?
Correct.
And this is it.
Correct.
Can you tell us what this shows?
What it shows, keep in mind, I have no dose information because there are no medical records. And what it shows is that repeated boluses of lorazepam over time can produce the concentration that was measured on autopsy.
You knew the concentration,
Correct.
and this particular simulation would be a dose that would reach concentration, femoral blood concentration at a particular time, right?
Correct.
What it shows is 10 IV injections of 4 milligrams of lorazepam every 30 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
beginning
Yes. I'm sorry, yes.
beginning at 12 midnight,
Yes.
and ending, the shots end 5 hours later.
Correct.
Now, you've testified that you You read the statements from the security staff, right?
I don't know what statements you're referring to.
Did you read the statements from the security staff, from Michael Lemire, from Alberto Alvarez, from Fahim
Yes,
Mohammed?
those were part of the material I received, I believe. And yes, if they were, I read all the material that I received.
All right. And you have, in this simulation,
Yes.
you have the first shot occurring how many hours past midnight?
First shot occurs at midnight.
At midnight.
Yes, yes,
4 milligram shot at midnight.
yes.
And you know from reading the statements that at midnight Michael Jackson hadn't even left rehearsal.
That may well be the case. I would have to look, but that's fine if it is, because keep in mind, you have the spreadsheets too. And the goal is to show that multiple doses can be used to do this.
Well,
You have all the simulations. I'm just trying to put together scenarios. I have no dosing records.
that would make a lot of sense if you didn't keep referring to Dr. Murray when you talked about this. What you did,
Counsel's testifying argument, and
Just a moment. Sustained. Ask a question, please.
what you did was come up with a dose to explain the concentration, and you started the shot when Michael Jackson hadn't even left rehearsal, right?
Sure. Yes.
And 30 minutes later, in this simulation, his second shot was at 12:30, right?
The second shot appears to be at 12:30. Let me pull. I can pull the spreadsheet up, and we can actually do any simulation you like.
I see.
Well, right now,
I have. I just let me pull it up so I actually have access to the simulation he's referring to, if I may, Your Honor.
well, I think Mr. Chernoff is just asking
Yes,
you
yes.
to testify based upon that exhibit, aren't
Sure.
you?
Yes. And I can give you the exact times.
Just listen to the question, though,
Yes.
rather than get to something else. Go ahead, Mr. Chernoff.
The second shot was at 12:30,
That is correct.
and you know from reading the statements that Michael Jackson was in a blue Escalade at that time, heading home.
You're telling me that he wasn't home. That's fine. So he wasn't home.
The third shot then would have been 30 minutes later at 1 a.m. Right?
Was he home then?
Almost.
Okay.
Well, based on the
Yes.
exhibit,
Uh-huh.
is that
Yes.
correct? The third shot would be at 1 a.m.?
The third shot was at 1 a.m.
Are you looking at your exhibit?
I'm looking at the exhibit right here on my laptop.
Are you looking at the one that you originally created or the one that was presented to the jury?
I am looking at that one as we're talking through it. Go ahead.
Because the one you originally created had an additional line, didn't it?
Let me look at the report. Yes, the one I originally created had something called responsive to painful stimulus and not responsive to painful stimulus.
And that line began at approximately
Those lines?
not responsive to painful stimulus. What point did it start?
That's just simply a point on the y-axis, so it's equally applicable at all points in time. It just runs the entire scale, so it runs from 0 to 12, but that's simply a range.
And where on the y-axis?
So that, I see what you're saying. That is about 0.15.
A little bit higher than 0.15?
Yeah, 0.152 or something like this. I actually have the absolute number for you.
Well, I didn't do a very good job, but I estimated here. Somewhere about there?
Yeah.
All right, Drew?
Yes.
Indicating a hand-written line horizontally.
Yes.
And this line represents not responsive to painful stimulus.
Correct.
Is that right?
That's based on the study by Dr. Geller and I.
So, lorazepam is not an analgesic, right?
That is correct.
What is an analgesic?
An analgesic is a drug that is used to specifically block pain in patients.
Right, it's a sedative.
This is a sedative.
So if we are at a level, a particular blood level, where a patient is not responsive to painful stimulus, that patient's asleep. Is that right?
That is, I would agree with that.
So based on your lorazepam analysis, 4 milligrams, 10 shots, by the 5th shot, the patient has exceeded your painful stimulus line.
That's correct.